So, for listeners that have not yet read The Fourth Wife, could you let them know what it's about?
Absolutely. So my elevator pitch for The Fourth Wife is it is a gothic horror set in 1882 Utah about Mormon polygamists living in a haunted house.
And I know Haunted House is such a huge staple in the horror community, so I bet people are even more excited now.
Oh yes, I love gothic books. They're like my absolute favorite genre to read and to write. And so I if people like gothic and they like gothic tropes, they're going to find a lot of them.
I agree. I agree. It serves. It serves. And, I feel like typically I ask what's your inspiration behind the book, but you kind of lay everything out in your author's note without giving too much away. How did The Fourth Wife come to be?
So I was born and raised Mormon. Um, Mormon heritage and like pioneers, ancestors, Mormon family is like a huge part of cultural and doctrinal Mormonism. And so I was really raised on stories of my ancestors, stories on, like my religious forebears. And I always really loved those aspects of church history. I found it so fascinating. And since I'm a huge history nerd, it just like sort of went all together for me. And when I started writing, years ago, I decided I wanted to write about Mormon polygamy, which is the practice of a man having multiple wives, which was something that the Mormon church practiced in the 19th century and was very much a part of my upbringing. Talking about polygamy, the possibility of polygamy existing in the next life, all sorts of stuff I could go on about if you want more details. But basically, I wanted to talk about polygamy and I wanted to look at my own ancestors. And when I looked at my own polygamous ancestors, I discovered that there was just so little information about the women. Very few of them used their voice, or if they did use their own voice, they actually completely ignored their own marriages in their recollections, which I think now in retrospect was trauma, just pure trauma. They're not going to talk about it because it was so damaging. And so I really wanted to give a voice to these women. I wanted to explore what polygamy was actually like because when you are a Mormon kid, yes, you grow up and you hear about polygamy, but it's very much like, oh, polygamy was hard, but everyone was faithful and we don't talk about it anymore. Because nobody wants to talk about the real nitty gritty on the ground polygamy and how it was actually lived. And so I did started doing research for it and I realized like this book is a horror book because this is terrifying. All of these things I'm discovering, all of this reality. And it was actually one of the big catalysts for like my own personal faith deconstruction journey, which went really hand in hand with The Fourth Wife. And when you read it, I think you'll see that through, especially like the main character, her faith and deconstruction journey that is happening throughout the pages as she learns more about her own like polygamous world.
Yeah, and I think it's no spoiler here that Hazel is the fourth wife. But, you know, for the LDS Church, the I would want to say the oldest wife, but the first wife, there's that air of supremacy almost potentially. So can you kind of walk listeners through that are unaware? What would it really mean to be a fourth wife?
So polygamy, one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that polygamy was very hierarchical. And I think that's because it was very patriarchal. Like polygamy as a system is very different than something than, say, polyamory, right? Which is the idea of multiple being in a marriage or in a relationship together and it's very consensual. Polygamy, or at very least, I'm going to just speak from Mormon polygamy because that's what I'm talking about. For Mormon polygamy, it's patriarchal. It is created by men for men. Everything revolves around the men. Polygamy at its heart is a literal doctrine for Mormon men to become gods in the next life, and women and children populate their literal celestial kingdoms. This is actually the very core deep doctrine of polygamy and of Mormonism. And so in reality, when polygamy was practiced in the 19th century, uh, the first wife generally is going to be the top, the head of the women, basically. This comes from a very loosely practiced part of polygamy that was called the Law of Sarah, which is the idea that if a man wants to take another wife, he has to ask his first wife for permission. However, the scripture that lays this law out says that if she doesn't agree, he can do it anyways because she'll be condemned. So it's sort of like a fake sense of consent, and a lot of women felt pressure to give consent or didn't give consent and he did it anyways. And so what would end up happening a lot of times is that the first wife then is going to be the one who controls all the resources. She controls, who does what jobs and, where women live. She just generally has a lot more say because she is the legal wife, the first wife. She's the one who's legally married to him. And generally, the one that was with him the longest, especially if they joined Mormonism early and then started practicing polygamy years later. Sometimes the wife that was had the most children could become kind of the top of the chain. Other times men just had favorites and those favorites would become the top of the chain. But basically, Mormon polygamy was not this utopic, everybody working together in this lovely household kind of thing. Maybe some families ran like that, but the vast majority, there's jealousies, there's hierarchies, there's someone in charge, there's someone getting more resources than the other, there's poverty, all of these issues. And when I wrote The Fourth Wife, I really wanted that to be captured. And you see the hierarchy of the wives, you see the personality of each wife and how each relates to polygamy very differently. And I did that on purpose. I want each wife to kind of represent a different take on polygamy. And you see that also in how Jacob, the husband, treats his different wives and the hierarchy that he gives to them.